Welcome to the webinar titled The Basics, You're Doing It All Wrong with nationally known radio programming consultant Kevin Robinson. Kevin is a record-setting and award-winning programmer. His brands consistently perform in the top three of the target. In his 35 years of radio, he's successfully programmed or consulted nearly every English language radio brand. Known largely as a trusted talent coach, he's the only personality mentor who's coached 3 different morning shows on 3 different stations in the same major market to the #1 position. Awards include nods by Radio and Records, NAB's Marconi, Radio Inc., and he has coached CMA, ACM, and Marconi winning talent. Ladies and gentlemen, Kevin Robinson.
Thanks, Dan. That and a quarter will get you downtown, won't get you downtown on a bus. That's stolen paraphrase from my friend Dick Biondi. Kids, Google his name. He's the legend. Thanks for the honor of your time. I'm going to spend the next couple of quarter hours not only sharing what I've learned in 38 years of broadcasting, but things that I've had to unlearn and relearn because of how we now know people consume our brand, our media, especially terrestrial radio. And thank you from the Michigan Broadcasters Association for having me here. And Jackie called me in January. She said, "Hey, can you do a 45-minute webinar?" And I'm like, I'm not that guy. I'm not that interesting. I might be able to do 11 minutes, but we'll give it a shot. What I'd like to do is just a little anecdotal story here. The 101st PGA teed off this morning in New York, and the USGA, the United States Golf Association, just comprehensively rewrote their rules. Because after a while, you put a rule into place and you let it burn in, and it's like, that's the rule. We're not going to change the rule. That's the way we've always done it. And radio broadcasters are the same way. And some of the rules they changed, if you're not a golfer, might sound kind of stupid to you. So for now at the USGA, when you're playing golf, you can leave the pin in when you're putting. And you might think, what? If you're not a golfer, these are going to sound pretty strange to you. If the ball moves on the green, it's not a 2-stroke penalty anymore. You can ground your club in a hazard. All these things are new rules that the PGA has put in place just this year. And soon, golfers will be able to wear shorts and take golf carts. As a matter of fact, John Daly is taking a golf cart today in the PGA. And by the way, Brooks Koepka has a 2-stroke lead. And if you're not a golfer, that doesn't make any sense to you. But in radio, we tend to have things the same way. And some of these things I did for years, never really questioned it, never got on the 30,000-foot view. And I'm like, why am I telling people to do that? That doesn't make any sense at all. So we're going to go down that road in about 5 minutes. What I like to do is I like to take 5 to 7 minutes and take everybody down a road, really a memory road and a radio road on how we got here, and really outline some of the threats that have come radio's way since 1920. And we'll start with KDKA in Pittsburgh. KDKA, hang on, slide, there we go. This is a brief history of radio, and we call it, radio is kind of the cockroach of all media, because there's several people that try to squash it out and just it's never worked, and still strong. 92% of the people listen to radio every week, even today. And this presentation, by the way, is really good for local chamber of commerce. So if you need a PDF of the next dozen or so slides on how resilient radio is, just shoot me an email, okay? The first radio signal came from downtown Pittsburgh on KDKA. Yes, a radio station had K call letters on the east side of the Mississippi. And they started with election results and the Westinghouse band. And radio was pretty robust quickly. And TV came along in 1943 and noticed that radio was pretty strong. So what did they do? They stole all their programming, The Shadow, The Lone Ranger. So radio was left to deal with really nothing. There was no long form programming that radio had left unless they generated it themselves, and some did. So they reverted to music. And so in 1955, there was music. There was more traditional music, Glenn Miller Band and such through World War II. But really, radio started taking off, especially with the younger generation, with the 1955's Rock Around the Clock and the honor roll of hits. The top 100 for the very first time came out in 1955, and they cobbled this together by how many pieces sold in stores, how many spins disc jockeys said they played. I think disc jockeys lied a little bit about that. You might want to check the history on that. And how many jukebox spins there were. So all of a sudden, rock and roll radio was born on the AM 1955. And then the internet came along in 1968, and we'll get back to that. These two kooky professors on the West Coast came up with this thing. It wasn't Al Gore. Came up with this thing called the internet, and we'll get to how the internet has impacted radio, as you know, but more specifically here in a few slides. 1971, the cassette tape comes along. So all these crazy kids can make mixtapes of their favorite 45s and travel with them, either on a device in their room or a Walkman or something like that. So this pre-recorded music could travel, and that was a big 8-tracks and cassettes were a big threat to radio. The result, very few remain. Collectors mainly do cassettes and 8-tracks. And then in 1975, recording tape for video comes around, called the Betamax. Then it became VHS, and Betamax went out of business. That's a different tragic story for Sony. But the reason this is important is because these people who were creating music could now do music videos, and thus these guys were born. MTV, 1981, August 1st, they played their first video, and it was called Video Killed the Radio Star. What's MTV doing now? Well, they were playing Jersey Shore and made those guys famous, but what are they doing today? They're playing shows like Catfish, no music videos at all. Compact disc came around in 1982. As a matter of fact, the first one was 1971, a homegrown one of an orchestra in Germany, but the first commercially produced CD was by ABBA, The Visitors in 1982, and Billy Joel's 52nd Street was the very first USA released CD. Now, why is this important? Obviously, you can take these CDs with high quality virtually anywhere you go, and thus another threat to radio. November 20th, 1985, Windows 1.0 came around. Now, those people like me who could program in COBOL and Fortran in DOS, we were rendered obsolete with Windows. Really didn't kick in until the early 90s in homes, but the result of what Windows has done, obviously, has helped radio through streaming. Many of these technologies have been killed by radio, but some of them have survived because of radio. Napster came along in 1999. If you don't know what Napster was Sean Parker's brainchild. Sean Parker was the first president of Facebook. He was in the Social Network movie played by Justin Timberlake. Napster was sued. It was shut down. It still remains in some form or another. But these guys, Pandora and Spotify, are ones who really want the radio ears today. And they're very robust too. 2001, XM satellite radio came along, and they were proclaiming that this is going to put terrestrial radio business, the terrestrial radio business, out of business. And they didn't. They were so unsuccessful that they had to merge. So Sirius and XM became Sirius XM. They are, I wouldn't say stealing. Consumption among people in America is about 15%. Generally, those with a connected dashboard, it's a little higher, but really it's flat or trending down as far as consumption of satellite radio. And they also beefed their numbers up, as you know, by taking credit for cars that are no longer in service. Portable digital music. About 12 years ago, a thing came out called Zune. Anybody have a Zune? It only lasted about 20 months before it came off the shelves. iPod was the biggest one. The last iPod rolled out in the stores in July 2017. Radio is still strong, despite the fact that we can digitally take our music with us. And obviously, it's in the phone that you're looking at right now. Everything or all technology that we've covered, or parts of it, can be found in your phone, and we'll get to that in a second. Music ownership and who's going to own the music. Walmart 15 years ago was the biggest retailer in music. I think they may have an aisle left. I know they do some online. iTunes is now the biggest owner of music, and Amazon is getting that space pretty rapidly. Within 5 years, Amazon will own everything. So radio, as we stroll down memory lane with radio, what is the future? Obviously, the dial is gone. The connected car, we need to fight, and the NAB is fighting hard for space in the digital dashboard, because if we lose that and if we just become an audio button, that's not going to be good things for us, especially since 70% of consumption of radio comes in the car. Smart speakers actually helping radio. Hopefully you have your station is smart speaker trained. So they say, play the radio station. It comes up, plays the radio station, whatever it happens to be, or any audio that you have in your building. Very important. And finally, I just thought I'd leave you with this Throwback Thursday to 1991, a Radio Shack ad. If you look at these, everything in this ad or parts of everything in this ad can be found in your phone, in that device you're holding in your hand right now. Fascinating. Even a CB radio. There's an app for CB radios. They have an ad there for a CB radio. I had one. I know a lot of people, maybe not you, but a lot of people did and still have a CB radio. It can be found, an app in your iPhone. So let's start with, hang on. Okay, if you have any questions, there's a Zoom webinar chat box on your screen. Just type it in. We can save those for the end, or we can go offline and have a separate chat, but let's make this interactive as possible. If you see something that you agree with, fight me on it, because these are observations that I've seen either through digital measurement and what that's afforded us to do, or observations from just listener panels, focus groups, observing how people consume our media over the past several decades.
Yeah, Kevin, if a viewer has problems finding the chat window, just mouse down to the lower center of your screen, and you'll see a chat icon there that you can click on.
Very good. A couple things before we get going. We're going to touch on 6 different subjects briefly, 1 or 2 items: branding, imaging, music, talk radio, a thing or 2 about my observation about sellers. And I've sold a lot of things in my life, but I've never sold a radio spot. So you can fight me on that too when we get to that. And social media, just really basic things that I've observed in clusters that I've worked with that, and I'm not a social media expert by any stretch, but things that I have observed just really in the last 15 years since the PPM has come out and other digital platforms are coming into our space. 2 things to think of as you're looking at the next dozen or so slides. One thing, and if you've seen me speak at all, or if I've ever coached you, I talk about 7 slots of short-term memory. That is, the human brain at any one given time has 7 slots of short-term memory, and then it takes about 22 seconds for those memories to be burned into long-term memory. So for example, if I asked you 2 weeks from now what the color of my shirt was, if I didn't point out that it was powder blue, you wouldn't remember. You wouldn't have burned it into long-term memory. So, and I say this because we've got to get into one of those slots. You can Google it, 7 slots of short-term memory. It's a scientific fact. I'm not making it up, but it would be pretty cool if I was. So look up the 7 slots of short-term memory. Use this when you're coaching, or if you have a client that wants to put 5 pounds of stuff in a 2-pound bag. Listeners can only retain a short amount, not only a short amount of things, but a short amount of time. And then the other one, 7 slots of short-term memory, the other one is 11 minutes. 11 minutes is the mean average time that a radio person who's holding a meter is exposed to a radio station per occasion. So every occasion is about 11 minutes. It doesn't matter if you're number 1 or if you're number 21. It's about 11 minutes. It doesn't matter if you're in Christian or talk or top 40. The average occasion, what we know from digital measurement, is about 11 minutes long. So when I talk about those 2 things, short-term memory and 11 minutes, there's 2 things that I just wanted to calibrate you with that I'll be pointing out as I go down the next 6 items or so. So basic rule when you see these slides are things that we've kind of by rote have burned into our psyche, especially in radio. And from what I've understood and what I've seen, how people consume our product, I think we can change these rules and have a different set of basics moving forward. Basic rule here, station ID, we call it first in and last out, should be the first and last thing the talent says during a break. A lot of people still do it. A lot of people still fight me on it. But if you're truly trying to build a relationship with the audience, you'd ID the station in the natural course of content. So it doesn't have to be first. It doesn't have to be last. You have to ID with robust enthusiasm and not throw it away. But and what I find is that if PDs say first and last out of a segment, they throw it away, meaning the air talent just by nature throw it away. They run through it. I call it chin boogie. They just kind of get it out of the way because my PD says, I've got to say this. Another basic rule under branding, the talent should also voice the station's slogan. Repetition is good for recall. So imagine if I was on a radio station and I say something along the lines of 4 decades of punk country and today's polka, K-Rob 108. I sound artificial. Okay, if we're trying to build a relationship, and by the way, talent's going to throw that away too. Okay, having the talent selling the station's slogan creates a barrier to building a relationship with the audience. I've seen it time and time again. They throw it away, it becomes chin boogie. And then related non-commercial brands, either NPR affiliates or Christian stations. I've worked with both. Think twice before you build a second cell line for your biannual fundraising event, because the audience is having trouble retaining your initial main station cell line. And if you create a second one, it's not going to print at all. That's basically for us. It's coming up with a nice fancy thing for our biannual fundraising that really doesn't mean a lot to the listener, but it means a lot to us. So just be mindful of that. Here's another basic rule. We don't need to ID the radio station every song, after every song or after every segment. Listeners know what brand they're hearing. This is, I hear radio stations, especially in the PPM world, that go a song or two without an ID. And they will tell me, well, we don't need to ID as much because it's average time exposed to a meter. If we say the call letters 40 or 4 times an hour, or the station slogan, it's not going to matter because they're being exposed to it. Well, I've learned from digital measurement with the average occasion about 11 minutes, okay? So in that 11 minutes, you could play 2 songs, 3 songs, and maybe only have 1 ID. And my analogy is, imagine if Starbucks, okay, printed a logo on every 3rd cup, or didn't do it on both sides. I mean, it'd save a ton of money, but every Starbucks cup has a logo on both sides. And I think we should ID as often as possible. I mean, if Starbucks didn't have a logo on both sides, maybe it wouldn't show up in the Game of Thrones. Who knows? Let's talk about imaging. So we talked about branding. We're starting at the top. We're going to go down on funnels like this and get down to the granular view. Basic rule in imaging. This is what I found. People write their stuff. They send it off to their voice talent, whether it's weekly, weekend, seasonal. They assume that these talented voiceover people know our brand, know what our radio station sounds like. Well, if they've been with you for 5, 6 years, maybe, but think about this. They're in a room for 6 hours, it's dark, they have a stack of these. You're not the only one they're sending it or they're receiving it from. Get on the phone and coach them with how you want your creative to be done. I've worked with John O'Hurley, Ann DeWig, Jeff Lawrence, and two things, they're not only very coachable, but they like human interaction because they're staring at a mic and copy all day long, and they hardly hear from anybody. So give them a ring every now and then and say, you know, this new Beat the Buzzer contest, we need to have it written, voiced like this. This is how I hear it in my head, being the program director or the operations director. And then related, write your copy to reflect your logo and cell line. What does that mean? So for example, if my logo says K-Rob 108, 4 decades of punk country and today's polka hits, if that's how it's written and that's how it's on my website, that's how it's on my station band, that's how you should say it. don't reverse them, because the listener has a hard enough time retaining things like your frequency. So mixing up different parts of your greatest hits or today's best music and juxtaposing it, TV does this all the time, meaning in a positive way. However their station logo looks on the screen, that's how they say it. Same time, every time. Another basic rule in imaging. To us, our brands sound unique voice talent, crafty promos, clever promotions. However, in the listener's mind, radio is most times a passive, not an active listening situation, okay? And a lot of times we're a utility like the switch on the wall. And so jingle packages to the listener, they all kind of sound the same, especially in category, whether it's classic hits or country. To us, they sound different because, we produced it. We put it on the air. I would encourage you to come up with an aural activator outside of your voice guide, your promotions, your jingle package if you use one. And that's like an Intel processor, or a wolf howl if you're a country station, you call yourself the wolf. McDonald's chimes, I'm loving it. Something that is unique to you, and use it in every piece. So when somebody's passively listening to your brand, they hear it in the background, oh, I'm listening to K-Rob 108. It goes a long way. Aural activators are very strong, and advertisers have been using them for years. Imaging requires to be spiced up, and now production directors love this type of thing. And I was a production director at one time, so I was a big fan. Put multiple sound effects, having a flanging speaker to speaker echo to make it stand out, when really your imaging starts with the writing. Everything else is icing. And if you put multiple sound effects in it, it's going to be harder to consume. We may be listening in a vacuum, in a speaker in the production room, but the more sound effects you put in a piece of production, the less it's going to print with the listener. It's just the fact. It's just how people consume stuff. A lot of sound effects get in the way of the message, and that's, we want the message first and not sound effects. Let's cover some things quickly on music. I was this guy forever with Selector and then Music Master. You need 70 minutes of separation between your core artists to prevent core artist saturation, and that's kind of the default for most music software, okay? We now know from the digital measurement the average time exposed per occasion about 11 minutes. Major groups, the big guys, have noticed this. So especially in their top 40 and their shorter playlist brands, 20-minute separation. I mean, if you have 22 Taylor Swifts and you're separating it by 70 minutes, you're not going to get to them in a day. And not all of her hits are created equal. You want the things that play her new song every 70 minutes or every 90 minutes. The people aren't staying around that long. So think of your radio station as a quarter hour or 20 minutes, isolate that and say, hey, every 20 minutes I can play a Taylor Swift song. We notice it, we see it in our histories. The listener doesn't notice it because they're just not as engaged as we are. Another basic rule, you should prevent female artists from airing back to back. I was a big fan of this in not only top 40, but oldies, and it's wrong. I was wrong. Don't tell that to my wife. Maybe you can get away with this, but think about what the sonics are on it. Miranda Lambert and Carrie Underwood, they're two different styles of artists. That could go fine. But also think on the inverse. A Mellencamp into a Bryan Adams into a Springsteen, those are kind of the same textures. So think textures of songs, not just female or male or vocal group or even instrumental. Just think about how the song sounds in a music suite back to back, because we're finding, and I was a big believer in having perfect histories in music scheduling, but song to song listening trumps great histories. How does this quarter hour sound? Does it represent my radio station? If I play the same song at 5 o'clock on Thursday that I did on 5 o'clock on Monday, it's not that big of a deal because people just don't remember things and see things like we do. Music brands should be driven with positive music momentum, and this is important. But remember that ballads and power ballads tend to bubble up in music tests. They're much more powerful songs, especially with women. If you're a station that's targeted to women, make sure your brand, if you have a fun brand, make sure it's fun. But I see morning guys, unless they have a strong music convention drop system, first thing they go for are the ballads. They think it slows down their morning show when those are the most powerful records probably in your library. And they're important to the music matrix. And related, play the hit version of the song. I've been guilty of this many times. You know, you get bored with some mix on a song and you want to spice up a Pink song by putting on some DJ's remix. The listener doesn't want that. They don't want live versions of songs. They want the song that was a hit in the market. If you're a gold-based station, find out whatever the hit version of that song was and play that song. That's the one they want to sing along with. They don't want to hear a jacked up remix or a live version. The only exception, and I still break this rule, is custom intros. I'm a big music suite momentum guy, and I'd like, even today with Top 40, nobody's putting intros on hardly anything because they want to get to the hit, the hook, fast. And I've got a half dozen or so custom music intros to keep the flow in the music suite going. But play the hit versions. And again, I've been guilty of that. Let's talk about some talk things. If there's any talk radio people in the room, or perhaps you have a talk radio station in your cluster, or your morning show is mainly talk on a music station, there are certain things that we kind of just let it burn into our psyche and really haven't questioned it. And one of those is talk radio segments and bumper music. I hear bumper music in local talk shows all the time, and I wonder why. Here's a local talk show. Why are they using bumper music? Because bumper music first came around in the Telstar, which became Westwood One genre, or I'm sorry, company, as pads for the national feed to be connected to the local station. So it's not so egregious if they join in the middle of a song or a piece of music imaging. And I still hear it today. I hear that Pretender song with Rush Limbaugh, rejoined at different places depending on where I am in the country. So that music pad was there to not squash local content. When local shows use bumpers, to me, it burns valuable time, and you could fit in another 10 seconds. As a matter of fact, on national programs, I hear big stations do a 10-second in or out with the bumper music that's provided by Rush or Hannity or who happens to be, or it gives you more time, another 10 seconds for content. And if you insist on using local bumpers, use the same one as an oral activator. So when I hear My City Is Gone by the Pretenders, I know I'm listening to Rush Limbaugh. So most of the time, if not all of the time, make it the same thing. So they know, boom, I'm listening to Rush Limbaugh. And a final thing that's not on the slide that bothers me, somebody will play Born to Run into a local segment, and they'll start talking when the vocal starts with Bruce Springsteen. Drives me crazy. It's hard. That's a whole different segment on talking over music. They do it in movies. You hear dialogue over songs, and it's just the human brain isn't wired to consume both of those. Another basic rule, you can gauge the impact of your content by the number of calls inbound to the station. Not true. Less than 3% of all listeners have called the radio station. You might be a cume of 80,000 people, and you have the same 12 to 18 people calling your show. You've got 4 lines. They're all lit up. That does not gauge how powerful or how much of a buzz your particular segment has. You can gauge buzz by digital platforms, I think. So if you put something on Twitter, the thread grows quite dramatically. I think you can see it there. Still a small sample. Facebook the same way. But I would encourage you to eliminate all inbound calls. That is from listeners. I would read texts, Twitter feeds, things like that. You control the narrative, you control the sound. There's a lot of crappy cell phones out there still, and you control the momentum. You know, you get on the phone, hey, how you doing? Doing fine, how are you? How's your Tuesday going? Momentum killers. And I hear this all the time, especially people who still take live calls. Drives me crazy. There's a sports station I worked with in St. Louis, 101 ESPN. They don't take phone calls. They read texts. That's all they do, so they can control the momentum. Another one, especially talk stations tend to do this. Hey, you know, my listeners start their listening at the top of the hour and the bottom of the hour, especially if you're a news product. You kind of get ingrained to the fact that you're in the middle of a talk program and you're doing your 2-minute Fox News and then your 2-minute local news. As we've shown from digital measurement, listeners are beehiving in and out of all times. In fact, during stop sets, studies have shown that front of the stop set and back of the stop set, you lose people, but it's about the same number of people because they beehive. They're just different people. Okay, so people are listening all the time. If you have a crummy commercial on, it's going to kill your TSL. Okay, you might think, well, that's in the seller's world. Well, that's your product if you're a programmer. Crummy commercials kill TSL. So I would view everything that comes out of the speakers as content and product for your brand. And then related, consider if you have a station that runs 2 7-minute stop sets, consider IDing in the middle, because if it's a 7-minute stop set, they're not going to hear an ID if they're buzzing in and out like bees during the stop set, or if it's somewhere in their 11-minute occasion with digital listening or digital time exposed. So you might make that part of your programming. So you tease the fact that in 90 seconds, something is going to happen on your radio station, or you're getting back to a piece of programming in a certain amount of time. Okay, something on talent here. Just a couple of things. We've covered talent already. There was a study, Karen Young did it with Arbitron, and it's about 20 years ago. Arbitron did a study that shows you have about 7 seconds to engage the listener with your content. And this goes with anything. This goes with TV shows, it goes with news. That's why CBS National News runs that Your World in 90 seconds. So you know the 7 stories they're going to do in the next 30 minutes. Listeners don't hang on to your every word and stay with you through every break or even through the hour. This is also why I encourage morning shows to recycle content. We tend to think that in real time, we only need to pre-sell the show at 6 a.m. when we sign on, even though we're talking about something we're going to do at 8:20. If you're an air talent or you're a morning guy or girl, I would reset your show every 20 minutes or 30 minutes. And if you reset in a break about every 60 seconds, so you're doing a 90-second, 2-minute piece, and the cue that comes in halfway through, they're not in the club. Those bees that come in, I would reset about every 60 seconds on what you're talking about, even if you don't have a guest or a caller on the line. Just so, what are they talking about? I have no clue. Just make sure that new cue is in the club. And then finally, also related, say your name and your show name often and with clarity. I hear people go through the show name so quickly, it's like, what did they just say? What's this show called? Is it The Breakfast What? Like I say, I call it Chin Boogie. I got that from Lorna Osmond, my former coach. People just go through it just to get rid of it. And this goes with your social media too. Say your Twitter handle slowly. Don't just throw it away because that's how you want to rejoin a segment. Make sure that people understand it and say it with clarity and with conviction. This is a lightning rod. You need a national prep service to feed your content. No. You got this thing you're looking at me on called the internet. That's all the content provider that you need. Prep services make people lazy. I will hear the same story about a snake in Idaho on 4 different morning shows when I'm listening in the morning. I'm like, oh, they have the same prep service. And if you're local, it disconnects you from the community. And inversely, if you do your own mining of content, you will have more emotional equity in that particular piece or that break or that story you're telling, rather than reading it off of a prep sheet. Now, prep services are valuable if they are clearing you of any copyright infringement on audio you use, Jimmy Fallon, or pictures you use. If they've cleared it for you, you're safe to go there. But as far as mining content on a daily basis, I would get rid of your prep service. A few things on sellers. Like I said at the top, I've never sold a spot in my life, but these are my observations. The first one is we need to offer 60-second ads as part of the buy. The client requires it. Well, that's 60 seconds nobody's going to listen to. When was the last time you sat through a 60-second spot? Whether it's on air, online, if you're DVRing it, you're not going to sit through even 10 seconds. And the industry's discussed repricing spots for years, 230s versus or 310s on a 30. Now's the time to do it because Spotify doesn't run 60s, Google ads no 60s, Facebook, YouTube does on occasion. They give you in 10 seconds a skip button. They'll do 3 or 4 minute ads, especially around Super Bowl time. They'll do longer versions of ads, but they have a click out version. Words with Friends, I play it all the time, and if I see a 30-second ad that I can't click out of, I'll reboot the app because I don't want to look at that. It'll be quicker to reboot the app. And Facebook is coming with ads, local ads soon. I don't know if you read that earlier this week. Digital ads need to be a part of every buy, no matter the category. Now, this is a big hot button too, because I know that you and your radio stations have digital selling goals. Understand that. But perform a comprehensive review, if you will, of what the client needs are. I'll tell you a story. A guy who lives next door to me here in Indianapolis. He's the statewide manager of Constellation Brands. They do Modelo and Corona and that new Refresca. He asked me to contact people in Evansville and Terre Haute and Indianapolis who the big performing morning shows were. All he wanted was the talent to sample the product, and then go do sampling events at different places. And you can use digital to push people there and your promos, but every person had a separate digital campaign they wanted him to buy. They weren't listening to him. He said several times, I don't care about digital. So just make sure that digital is right for your particular client. And then finally, client voicing his or her own spot moves traffic to the brand. It all depends. It's the message, not the messenger. If your client is able to tell a different story about here's what happened, or I'm sorry, here's the problem, here's what we did, here was the result, and this is what happened because of it, and your client can tell that story better, I recommend you do a client spot. But just having read price of an item is a tune out, especially if they're unpolished. My friend Tim Burt, Market Anything, he's an ad wizard. He interviews clients on their service. He'll do 7 minutes with them and then cut them into 30-minute spots on different things they said, which is a brilliant way to have a client voice their own spot. He takes his part out, and all you hear is the client making statements or telling stories about his or her services. Social media, not a social media expert by any means, but here's a few things that I've just kind of learned over the years. People jump into social media and they don't ask themselves why quite often. Oftentimes, especially in smaller clusters, we need as many people putting things on our social feed so it stays fresh. It needs to be targeted. Social media needs to be targeted just like your terrestrial brand. So if you're a soft AC, I wouldn't be on Twitter. It's male driven and there's a lot of hate on there. Doesn't feel good. Find the one that's good for you. Sports stations notoriously don't go on Instagram or Pinterest. Find out who your target is, where are they on that social space, and then target and not only your content, but your postings to that particular target. The other one is delete any unsupervised accounts you have. It'll make you look disconnected, creates a vibe that you're inattentive to what you do. I'm guilty of that too. I've got a SoundCloud account that I haven't looked at in a year. We all get that way. We have as many people as possible in our organization blogging, posting fresh content. I would come up with a strategic plan on what is the posting convention, what are the best practices, how do we do this? What are we going to post? How often we're going to post? It appears that 1 or 2 posts a day get the most attention. The more you post, obviously it goes further down in the feed. Not all content is created equal. Come up with a plan on who's posting, when it's posted, what's posted, and again, targeting is a key. And then we need to jump into the podcasting space ASAP. The morning show needs to have a podcast. Wrong. And here's why. Podcasting, even though it's been around a while, is in its infancy, and there are much brighter people in this space than me. But I do know that you need to ask your talent, is what you're doing on the air approaching excellence? Because if it's not, go work on that. Go work on promos. Go work on content for your show the next day. Take that hour that you're going to do a podcast and work on your terrestrial signal brand. And then eventually maybe you can go to podcast, or you can podcast on weekends or something like that. And then they will also be disappointed in consumption. It'd be like, well, look at that. I only had 6 clicks and 2 downloads. You know, it can be very discouraging. And then you run into pod fade is what they call it, where you just kind of lose interest. Those are my, overall, those are the things that I've learned in 6 categories from 38 years in broadcasting. I appreciate your time. We have time for questions. Here's some other things that I speak on. If your association or your group needs to have programming, I speak to a lot of radio groups and a fair amount of associations, and do webinars for different organizations. What you need to be a program director in 2019, I find that program directors get to that chair because they're there quite a bit of times, especially in medium and small markets, and they don't have the tools to really become a robust programmer and really treat it as a business you love, a business you have passion for, but really the discipline to put together a strategic plan and then tactics for that brand. Coaching the coaches is designed at program directors, operations directors, on how to build trust with coaching, and how to come up with a strategic plan for a morning show, why everybody needs a coach. I have a coach, I have a speech coach, to work on stuff that I do like this. And then branding in a social media age, that's really social media for dummies. I'm not an expert, but I observe how different clusters have really done social media. Everybody's time starved, come up with that strategic plan. That's really, like I said, a social media for dummies, and coming up with a plan for your cluster to maximize the time. And then 20 things, this is for Air Talent, 20 things you need to do today to improve your show. It's very basic, and you can take away even 10 of those and your show will be better tomorrow. That's all I have. Thank you for your time. I'm available for questions now, or here's the contact if you want to reach out to me offline. I really appreciate you joining us. I think we got up to 34, 35 participants, and if you would like to have a PDF of this, let Dan at the Michigan Association of Broadcasters or Jackie know, and I'll send it to them and they can ferret out to the association members.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Yeah, we will be sending a link to a video of this webinar, as well as the PowerPoint presentations to the various state associations that joined us today. Again, thank you for joining us, and Kevin, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Thanks, Jackie.